I'm Ken Gavin, special guest historian for Gettysburg History, a new initiative of the Adams County Historical Society that takes us beyond the battle, just like the museum does, to show us the depth and breadth of the history of the town, the history of the county, not just in 1863, not just in the American Civil War, but let's look at how rich it is over time. I'm standing today in front of the Dobbin House, the oldest structure in the borough of Gettysburg, built in 1776, the home of the Reverend Alexander Dobbin and his very large family, and the first classical school west of the Susquehanna River. We're here in front of an 18th century building today for a reason. This is the introduction to a special video series called Liberty, Lineage, and Legacy. Through this series, we're going to take you to some key spots on the battlefield here, but we're going to show you how famous names from the Battle of Gettysburg are connected to Revolutionary War ancestors. If you want to know a little bit more about Gettysburg in the period of the American Revolution, of course, it's not even a town yet, not founded until 1786 by James Geddes. However, this is a bustling crossroads on the edge of the frontier, multiple taverns, multiple roadways, local industries, and it is supporting the Revolutionary War effort. You can go onto the YouTube channel and you can watch a video of a lecture that I did for ACHS back in March of this year entitled 7 Years Before Gettysburg and the American Revolution. Spend some time with that, learn a little bit more about the area during that crucial period in our history. But for today, we're going to take you out on the field and talk to you about some famous ancestors of famous names here at the battle. I'm coming to you today from in front of the Virginia State Memorial, the first Confederate state monument erected here on the battlefield at Gettysburg, dedicated in 1917 by the niece of General Robert E. Lee, along with the then sitting governor of Virginia, Henry Stewart. Robert E. Lee, of course, is behind me atop his famous war horse Traveler. As we all know, he's the commander of the Army of Northern Virginia here during the Battle of Gettysburg, a major thrust north into Pennsylvania, trying to end the war with one bold stroke. And before the war, he had been one of the most famous and storied soldiers in the United States Army, former superintendent of West Point, captor of John Brown, had served in the prestigious Corps of Engineers, and had served in the Mexican War as well. But we're here today to talk about not so much General Robert E. Lee himself, but his famous Revolutionary War ancestor, Henry Lee III, known maybe to you as Light Horse Harry Lee. So that's Robert E. Lee's father. Robert E. Lee, born in 1807 at Stratford Hall in Virginia, is the fifth son of Light Horse Harry from his second marriage. Light Horse Harry Lee was born in 1756, and when the American Rebellion broke out in the mid-1770s, in 1775, he was not a fence sitter. He joined the Patriot cause immediately, was commissioned a captain, and he commanded a company of dragoons. For our Civil War folks, you might know that more as cavalry. So the terms dragoon and cavalry in the American Revolutionary period, pretty much interchangeable. And just like in the American Civil War, cavalry is going to be responsible for intelligence, counterintelligence operations, harassing an enemy's flanks, harassing their rear, harassing their supply lines, harassing their communication lines. And Light Horse Harry Lee is very effective in command of his troops. He will fight during the Philadelphia campaign in 1777 at battles like Brandywine, Germantown, and he will soon afterwards be promoted to the rank of major and given command of a legion, a body mixed with cavalry and infantry troops. In 1778, his fame is going to ratchet up a notch because he's going to be responsible for a little bit of a payback mission at a place called Edgar's Lane in northern New Jersey. Edgar's Lane was a surprise assault on a column of Hessian dragoons. And the reason Edgar's Lane developed as a battle was not long before that. On September 27, 1778, a detachment of the 3rd Continental Dragoons under the command of Colonel George Baylor are at Old Tappan, modern Rivervale, New Jersey, and they're spending the night at various farmhouses throughout the region. Baylor's location has become known to Crown forces, and the British decide they're going to make a surprise night attack. They'll sneak up on Baylor and his men, surround the houses where they're staying, and bayonet several of those troopers to death. It is known as Baylor's Massacre. Baylor himself barely escapes with his life, although he tried to escape up a chimney and was wounded by bayonets several times. The British pulled him out of that. They made him a prisoner of war. Baylor would die in 1784 as a result of those wounds. The Continentals were extremely angry about what they deemed this surprise attack, this massacre. So, Light Horse Harry Lee is the person who's going to get command of the payback mission. Working with local citizens who are sympathetic to the Continental cause, he obtains intelligence about a Hessian dragoon column that is going to be coming through the area. And this local citizen directs the Hessians right down Edgar's Lane, a short road in northern New Jersey. And in the bushes and trees on either side, that's where Light Horse Harry is with his men. They open fire from both sides simultaneously, wounding and killing several Hessians before pushing them out of the roadway. Several Hessians fall off of cliffs into the Hudson River and drown. The rest are entirely captured. This really catapults Light Horse Harry's star upward on a trajectory. Later in 1779, at a low point for the Continental effort, when the American economy is in a shambles, when the British hold New York City, when the war has reached a stalemate, hopes for the American cause are reaching an all-time low. So, Light Horse Harry Lee is put in charge of a special assault team that is going to attack a British fortification at Paulus Hook. You might know that as modern-day Jersey City, New Jersey. And the fortification that he attacks is going to be right in the heart of what is modern downtown Jersey City. Lee will kill or capture over 150 British men, suffer only 2 casualties. And this is a massive propaganda coup for the Continental effort. People celebrate this victory. People have renewed hope in the American war effort. Lee is given a gold medal and is presented with a sword by Congress for his efforts there. After fighting in northern New Jersey, Lee and his legion will move southward. That is where the theater of war has shifted by this point in time. He's promoted to lieutenant colonel at this point. He's going to fight with Francis Marion the Swamp Fox in partisan operations in early 1781. Then he's going to link up with General Nathaniel Greene in the early months of 1781, moving towards the spring in what's called the race toward the Dan River. And they're dragging British General Charles Cornwallis through the Carolina backcountry, forcing Cornwallis to burn supplies as he goes, weakening his forces, and they finally get across the Dan into Virginia itself. It's basically starting to set the stage for what will become the Yorktown campaign. That is another place where Lee will fight. He'll be present at the surrender. He will leave the army in 1781 after the capitulation of British forces at Yorktown, even though the American Revolution is not going to end until 1783. Yorktown's our last big land battle here in North America. Lee will retire to his home at Stratford. After the war, he will become extremely active in politics at the local and the national level. He'll serve as a delegate for Virginia to the Constitutional Convention. He will come home to Virginia and fight hard to have that state ratify the United States Constitution. He'll go on to serve as the governor of Virginia for 3 years. He serves in the U.S. House of Representatives as well. So, and at this point, we need to address something about Light Horse Harry Lee's character. There has been an unfortunate myth that has sprung up over the years that Light Horse Harry Lee was a negligible father to Robert E. Lee, that he squandered multiple wives' fortunes because he was a gambler and then he went off to the West Indies. Actually, that's not true. Light Horse Harry Lee, like many individuals after the American Revolution, invested in land, speculated in land. In order to pay for the land where he was investing, they're getting bills of credit. As we move into the 1790s, the new nation's economy is extremely shaky. What's happening in the mid-1790s in Europe? The Napoleonic Wars are getting underway. And in 1796 and 1797, British citizens are extremely afraid that Napoleon will invade Britain itself, and it creates a run on British banks, on the Bank of London. Citizens in London start demanding that they are able to withdraw their deposits, not in promissory banknotes, but in hard gold specie. As a result, British Parliament will restrict the banks through the Bank Act, the Restriction Act of 1797, and prevent depositors from pulling out that hard specie deposit. That is critical for the American economy because it creates a global credit crunch. Many investors like Light Horse Harry Lee, James Wilson, who is a seated member of the United States Supreme Court, and others lose their fortunes in the blink of an eye and become debtors. So the reason that Light Horse Harry Lee goes into debt is not because of malfeasance, it's not because of a gambling addiction, it's because of an investment gone south, which can happen to pretty much anybody. And as for the old myth that he abandoned his family, let's address that now too. The reason that Light Horse Harry Lee goes to the West Indies is because he becomes seriously injured during the War of 1812. He's not serving during the War of 1812, but he's got some friends in Baltimore who run a newspaper. And that newspaper is not necessarily supporting the effort to go to war against Britain at that point in time. And he goes to the defense of his friends. When he does that, they're attacked by a mob in Baltimore. That mob throws them into a jail. Light Horse Harry Lee is severely tortured and beaten for several hours and almost dies. He's beaten so severely that it affects his speech for a period of time. And as many individuals do in the late 18th, early 19th century, he seeks the climate of the West Indies because he thinks it will help him to heal. And he spends time in the West Indies, and when he's trying to make his way back home to Virginia, it becomes very clear that he is dying. He stops in Georgia, and that is where he's going to die. Interestingly enough, in his final days, he's being cared for by the daughter of Revolutionary War General Nathaniel Greene, who had been given a rice plantation in Georgia. Initially buried in Georgia, Light Horse Harry will die there in 1818. His remains are transferred to the Lee family crypt almost 100 years later in 1913. So that is our ancestor connection to General Robert E. Lee of Gettysburg fame. We should talk about one more thing while we're here, because as impressive as Robert E. Lee's pedigree is on his father's side from a revolutionary perspective, it's even more impressive from his mother's side, because Robert E. Lee's mother was the great-granddaughter of Martha Washington. That's right, folks. The First Lady of the United States of America, the wife of the Commander-in-Chief, George Washington, Martha Washington herself. She is the great-grandmother of Mary Custis Lee, wife of Robert E. Lee. So when the Lees move into Arlington House, that house belongs to Lee's wife before it belongs to him, and they inherit it. At Arlington House are several of the relics of Washington's war service, inclusive of his marquee tent. A marquee tent is a really big tent that can go out into the field. It has made of canvas, has an entryway space, a foyer, office space, sleeping quarters. It's divided into several parts, something that a general in command of an army would need to oversee operations in the field, to meet with staff officers, to have meals. One of Washington's marquee tents is packed away in its original huge leather suitcases called portmanteau, and that's in the basement of Arlington House. Now, of course, Robert E. Lee resigns his commission in the United States Army to serve his native state of Virginia when the Civil War breaks out in 1861. That leaves his wife at home. Robert E. Lee has gone to take command initially of Virginia's state forces, and his wife has to make a decision. She decides that she's going to leave Arlington House early in May of 1861, and she's going to leave the house in the care of an enslaved African-American woman named Selina Gray, who had spent her entire life in slavery at Arlington House at that point in time. She gives Selina Gray the keys to the house and the keys to the basement where the Washington war relics are stored, and instructs her to take care of them no matter what. Pretty soon, there are some major developments at Arlington House, because Arlington, of course, in Northern Virginia, on the heights, overlooks Washington, D.C. That's an area, if Confederate troops take it in 1861, the capital could be in danger. So, General Irvin McDowell, in one of the early strategic operations of the war, is charged with taking Arlington Heights and Arlington House. And by mid-May of 1861, he has over 14,000 soldiers encamped upon what had been the home of Robert E. Lee. Interestingly enough, he is going to do everything within his power to respect Mrs. Lee's wishes that the property remain as unmolested as possible, that the house not be ravaged or ransacked, and that he prevent looting to every degree. And I'm going to take a minute and read you a quick letter from Irvin McDowell to Robert E. Lee's wife. So on May 30th of 1861, General Irvin McDowell writes the following: to Mrs. R. E. Lee, Madam, I am here temporarily in camp on the grounds, preferring this to sleeping in the house. I assure you it has been and will be my earnest endeavor to have all things so ordered that on your return you will find things as little disturbed as possible. Everything has been done as you desired with respect to your servants and your wishes, as far as possible. You will not consider it an intrusion if I have the most sincere sympathy for your distress, and I shall be always ready to do whatever I can to alleviate it. General Irvin McDowell. McDowell writing to Mrs. Lee, assuring her that he's going to do his best to respect her wishes. It becomes evident very soon to Irvin McDowell that the Washington war relics are there in that house because Selina Gray, that enslaved woman, informs him that they're in the basement. McDowell is petrified that he does not have the ability to prevent young soldiers from breaking into that room, from looting or destroying things that are of significant historical value to the founding portion of the country. So, by early 1862, all of the remaining Washington war relics, including that marquee, that war tent that Washington used in the field, are going to be removed from Arlington House, and they're going to be transferred to the Patent Office in Washington, D.C. The Patent Office was a huge building. Construction had started there in 1836. In addition to government offices that are in the Patent Building, it's being used as a museum, and it's also being used as a federal hospital installation in 1862 for wounded Union soldiers. And the hospital becomes overcrowded. When it becomes overcrowded, soldiers are put out into the hallways right near the exhibit display cases that are showcasing all of Washington's war relics, along with this marquee tent that had been taken and put up on display. By 1881, that's going to be transferred to the care of the Smithsonian Institution following a fire at the Patent Office, and it's going to be held there for several years. While this post-war period of the tent moving around is happening, there is a Supreme Court case involving that old Arlington estate. Because, remember, Mrs. Lee will leave in 1861. Unfortunately, she's never going to return to that home. By 1864, the United States government has seized the entire property and turned it into a cemetery for military personnel. Military personnel who have died in the service of their country. We know that today as Arlington National Cemetery, so its roots are in the American Civil War. However, in the 1870s, Robert E. Lee will die in 1870, his wife will die in 1873. Not long after that, the eldest son of the Lee family, Robert Edward Lee Jr., will engage the federal government in a lawsuit. And he's going to sue them because he wants the Arlington House and Arlington property back. He claims there was not due process with the seizure. And in a Supreme Court decision, that's right, a case that goes all the way to the United States Supreme Court, they decide in favor of the Lee family 5-4 that the property is going to be returned. At that point in time, Robert Edward Lee Jr. actually wants nothing to do with the property. He wants to sell it back to the federal government. And he's going to do that for $150,000. And at the ceremony to sign that over, to sell that back to the federal government, we have R.E. Lee Jr., son of General Robert E. Lee, and Robert Todd Lincoln, then serving as Secretary of War. So the son of President Abraham Lincoln and the son of General Robert E. Lee are involved in that transaction to sell Arlington back to the federal government following that Supreme Court case. So what happens to the tent? Well, the tent never makes it back to Arlington, and it's with the Smithsonian Institution. That, though, was deemed property of the Lee family as part of that Supreme Court case. So Lee descendants will sell that tent in 1909 to an Episcopal priest named Reverend W. Herbert Burke from Norristown, Pennsylvania. Norristown, Pennsylvania, not far from a famous Revolutionary War location called Valley Forge. Right. W. Herbert Burke is not just an Episcopal priest. He is early one of the people who is thinking about preservation efforts at Valley Forge and about educational efforts at Valley Forge. He writes a guidebook for people who want to come see that famous encampment of the Continental Army. And when he buys the tent, he uses it as a fundraiser. He's going to set it up on the grounds of Valley Forge occasionally, and he will charge people to be able to see the tent and to go inside of it. That eventually goes into his collection. Today, that tent is on display at the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia. And you can go and you can see it there with the Washington's War Tent exhibit. And it still bears the markings from the days when it was in the Patent Office, from when they put it back together over there. So, from Washington in the field to the basement of Arlington House, to the patent office, to the Smithsonian, to W. Herbert Burke. That tent still exists today, and it was saved because of the efforts of Selina Gray, an enslaved African woman, and General Irvin McDowell.